This is a map of Abraham's travels. I was asked to do a geography lesson of the Old Testament, but I figured maybe I'll just take it one map at a time. Now, the story of Abraham starts in Mesopotamia, and this is about 1,000 years after the Tower of Babel. And we come to this region called Babylonia, and this is later known as Babylon. And when we meet him in Genesis chapter 11, he's living in a city called Ur, not too far from the Persian Gulf. Now, this whole area here is modern-day Iran and Iraq. Up here, you have modern-day Turkey, modern-day Egypt, modern-day Israel. That kind of gives you an idea of the region. So in Genesis chapter 11, Abraham is living in Ur, still living with his parents. Now, archaeology has been able to excavate the site of the city of Ur and been able to find out quite a bit of it. This is a layout. It was a walled city, and it was on the Euphrates River, and they did have a couple harbors. And all this little blank space here, this is all the housing. So everybody lived inside, and of course you'd have farming region outside of it. But Abraham's going to have a drastic change in lifestyle, going from city life to an agrarian life. So Abraham's father, Terah, and his whole family decide to move from Ur. He moves them up to a place called Haran, which is actually the name of Abraham's brother, who would be Lot's father. Most likely, Terah named this little town after his son, who probably had died by that point. Now, this is where Genesis 12 picks up. After his father dies, God calls Abraham and tells him to travel to a land that he will show him, and he travels with his nephew, Lot. Now, when Abraham enters the land of Canaan, he goes all the way down to a place called Shechem. And this is a religious center for the inhabitants of this land. And there, taking part in his own religious ceremonies, he builds an altar to the God who called him to come here. So this is the first structure we see built for the God of the Bible. However, God is not just one of the many gods. And so as Abraham settles outside of that area, between Ai and Bethel, he actually builds another altar to the Lord away from all the false gods. And it's here in the Judean hillside where Abraham is told that everywhere he sets his foot will be given to him. This whole entire region one day will belong to his descendants. Now, after Abraham builds the altar to the Lord in the wilderness between Ai and Bethel, he actually goes out to Egypt. And here he makes a silly mistake, pretending that his wife is actually his sister. And he does this because he's afraid that they'll kill him and take his wife for their own. So if she is his sister, then if they take her, that sin is on them, at least according to his mind. But after this is discovered, he gets kicked out of Egypt and heads back up north to the Hebron area. Now, while they're here, both Lot and Abraham are blessed because of the blessing God gave to Abraham. So they decide to part ways, and Lot moves south towards the valley of Sodom, near Sodom and Gomorrah, on the south end of the Dead Sea. However, in this region, there were 5 kings who were rebelling against their 4 distant overlords, and there was this big battle going on, and the rebelling kings were conquered, but in the process, Lot was actually taken captive. So Abraham actually has to travel up to Damascus to rescue him, and then comes back down. And at Salem, this is where we meet Melchizedek, who is the high priest and king of Salem, which is also believed possibly to be Jerusalem, because Salem means peace, and Jerusalem means city of peace. So it's very possible that the city of Salem just kept the whole phrase as part of its name, and so simply went from Salem to Jerusalem. Now, in the region of Hebron, this greater area, this is where he stays for a while, and this is where he has the incident with Hagar and Ishmael being born. This is also where his name is changed from Abram to Abraham and Sarai to Sarah, and this is also where he's circumcised to solidify his covenant with the Lord. Now, after the incident with Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham moves from the Hebron area just a little bit south to Gerar, and this is where he runs into some trouble where he decides to lie about his wife and say that she is his sister, and that whole thing with Abimelech. So in this area, this is also when Isaac is born and when Hagar is sent off into the wilderness just south of there. And that's when the angel of the Lord has pity on her and gives Ishmael a quasi-blessing of his own. Now after this is when God tells Abraham to go to the land of Moriah, which is somewhere in the Jerusalem area. So he heads back north, and this is where the whole attempted sacrifice of his son happens. And there's many who believe that the mountain that the temple was built on in Jerusalem is the place where that event happened. Now, Sarah dies, and she's buried in a cave in Hebron, although it wasn't known as Hebron at that time. Now, at some point, Abraham wants to find a wife for his son Isaac, but he doesn't want a woman from these down here, from any of the people who live in this area. So he sends his servant all the way back up to Haran to his relatives, because remember, his father had settled in that land, so he has relatives that lived there who didn't travel down with him when God called him. And this is the story of where we find Rebekah. Rebekah is the daughter of Abraham's nephew, Bethuel. And so she is the one who waters all of the camels, and the servant negotiates with her brother Laban, and they end up, through a whole nice long story, coming back all the way down to Hebron, where Isaac comes out to meet her, and they fall in love and all that stuff. Now, Abraham does not leave Hebron again. This is where he lives until he dies, and he's buried in that place. Although he did have another wife and more kids, Isaac is known as the son of the promise and the one through whom God would continue the line.